Welcome to the Nerdiverse. Go ahead, sit and listen to the masters, the old heads, talk about what you love the most. Video games, comics, movies, and everything you need to maintain your week. Got the knowledge that's straight out the ether. Gonna need a drink and have to take a seat to expand your mind and listen to the speaker. Mike and the squad's gonna give you what you need. Please send in the question, come and get some answers, learn a couple lessons from the masters with the special guests. We got the green lanterns glowing on their chest. Yes, please sit back and relax, cause we're gonna hit you with them stone cold facts. And allow me to be the very first to welcome you to the masters of the Nerdiverse. Welcome to the Masters of the Nerdiverse podcast, where we always have some sights to show you. I am, of course, your host, Mike G, and today with me is a very special host, very special guest from the Underrated Movie Podcast, where they go over every underrated movie you could possibly think of. A couple of my favorites are Crimson Peak, which is an excellent Guillermo del Toro film that I don't think enough people give praise to, and The Phantom, which is one of my childhood favorites. Today I have with me one of the greats himself. I have Derick McDuff, the man himself, the man, the myth, the legend. How are you doing, sir?
I am doing well. Thank you for that great introduction. I'm glad you enjoyed those movies because those are obviously, since I covered them, a couple of my favorite underrated movies.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's just funny that you have a podcast directly on the unsung heroes of cinema. The ones that people may have forgotten or weren't around for. So I think that's you're doing the universe's work there.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the big driving reasons that I wanted to do that podcast is because there's a ton of great movie podcasts out there, but I wanted to talk about the movies that might not necessarily get covered on your typical movie podcast and kind of shine a light on these, as you put it, unsung heroes.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I'm always looking out for is new, fresh content for my own self, just to be able to listen to. So I'm happy to add the Underrated Movie Podcast to my list as I'm doing my day to day. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Yeah. I hope you're enjoying it.
Absolutely. So today I wanted to talk about a topic that I think set a fire to pop culture ever since D23 and ever since Comic-Con, which is kind of the Marvel Studios and kind of a resurgence in Marvel Studios. And just wanted to invite you to have the conversation to actually ask the question, where is Marvel Studios now? Where do we see it going in the future? Just out of curiosity, what is your overall history with Marvel Studios? Were you a Marvel kid growing up? Are you fairly a fan of the films? Have you looked into any of the comics? I'm just curious about your history with it.
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of Marvel. Just kind of in a lot of different varieties. I was definitely a Marvel kid. I'm like I think you said yourself, because I was listening to your Deadpool and Wolverine episode. We're of the generation that grew up watching kind of the original MCU, which was the 90s cartoons, where you'd see Spider-Man would go crossover with the X-Men, and then Captain America would be in an episode, and so that was kind of like my introduction to superheroes and how they would cross over and all that stuff. I was just obsessed with those shows. And then as a teenager, so that was when I was like a kid. As a teenager, I got into more of the comic books. I specifically the Ultimate comic books, which the MCU draws really heavily on. That was a really good jumping in point, because the mythology and the backstory of all these characters over 60, 70 years, however long it had been at that point, had gotten so entangled and complicated. And the Ultimates were like, all right, we're going to bring it all back to square one, much like the Marvel Cinematic Universe did when it launched, in 2008. And then actually my first foray into podcasting really was covering the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because before I had Underrated, I did a podcast, or I still do actually, a podcast called Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones, where I review whenever, and that one's infrequent. Whenever there's a new MCU property, I'll review that movie. So had the first episode in a while. You're talking about Deadpool and Wolverine, but yeah, it's always been I've always been a fan of superhero movies, and I got more and more into Marvel superhero movies as the MCU became a bigger and bigger thing. And just by the time I got to Endgame, I was just completely sold.
100%. I love that you mentioned the Ultimates, which was a big turning point for me as well, because like you said, it was that grand reset of the Marvel universe, and like you said, a lot of inspiration came from the Ultimates universe. Even the Fantastic Four, which we'll talk about a bit later on, have shifted because of the
Mm.
influence of Brian Michael Bendis and you know, Brian Hitch, the artist
Mm.
on
Yeah.
the Ultimates, who really helped shape the design that would come to be the infamous MCU style
Mm.
uniform. A lot of that's from the
Yeah.
Ultimates. So it's good that you have such a storied history. You even have your own podcast on this topic. So this will be a great place for us to start. So the first place I would like to go over today, the first topic would be the overall Phase 5 response, and just
Mm.
how people are taking Phase 5, the multiverse saga, I would say, in total, and just our ideas on do you think that Deadpool is really the uh, jumping point for more of a positive feedback from the overall, MCU fan?
Right, and I think this is interesting because in a lot of ways, I feel like Phase 5 is really mirroring where we were at in Phase 2. Because I feel like people kind of are like, Marvel's fallen so far. Remember Endgame, how good that was? And it was like, yeah, because we built up to Endgame for many, many years, there was a whole thing in Phase 2 where people were highly critical of Marvel. I think like they were also critical in Phase 5, movies like Avengers Age of Ultron was, I think, mixed at best. And, you know, it has been a little, I would say, harsher in Phase 5 than Phase 2. But I really think that, these things, it's clearly this is the mid chapter. They're introducing these new characters. They're building things up to once again get back to the Avengers movies. They have, I think, wisely taken a break from the stand or the kind of actual Avengers movies. It's good to have a break after Endgame so that we're not, you know, overwhelmed by you don't it's kind of like reminds me of something you were saying in your Deadpool episode where it's like you don't need a parody film every year. You got to give it a break, and that's how I feel like it is with the Avengers. And some of it, I think it's a combination of a lot of things, right? It is a combination of some of these are not just hitting as well, so it's just not as good. Some of it's like we're in the mid phase, and some of it is also just toxic fans, right?
Mm-hmm.
I always think of, like people like Deadpool was good. Like I liked Deadpool, but I don't think it's like higher quality than necessarily some of the other stuff that Marvel's been putting out. I think that they put out some better stuff recently. Guardians of the Galaxy 3, I thought was really, really good. Or even, I think of like She Hulk, which got torn apart by fans, which is very similar to Deadpool and Wolverine, and I think I even liked it a little better. And it's the same kind of comedy, but one is a girl and one is Ryan Reynolds. So I think I understand why the internet is the way it is. It's gonna react a certain way.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was the lone champion for She-Hulk, because anyone who's read a She-Hulk comic knows that is par for the course,
Yeah.
and that is honestly one of the most comic book accurate portrayals of a character that we've seen. But if you don't know, you don't know. And then, like you said, it's easy to hide in the shadow of a doubt when we're in like this new normal of culture, where
Mhm.
it's cool to tear apart and ask questions later. But
Yeah.
I really love that you mentioned, Phase 2, and how that was a very hit or miss type of transitional period, between before we got to the on ramp, which was Thanos.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I think what people forget is that uh, not every film in Phase 1 and 2 or 3 had to do with the Infinity Stones. They had their own
Right.
individual storylines, their own, and that really didn't have anything connected to it. And I think that wouldn't fly nowadays, because everything has to be spoon fed, and everything has to be
Yeah.
kind of be tilted toward what is the end game, quote, no pun intended.
Yeah.
So I think Phase 5 is smart because they needed put their foot on the brake. I think you nailed it when you said that we were over inundated with content to the point where we, as fans, we became numb to it.
Mm-hmm.
Make them miss it, right? Like I was saying
Yeah.
in the Deadpool review, make them miss it. And I think Deadpool, because it's been gone for 6 years, and it's like a return to force. I think this is the perfect place to take Phase 5 for however long we have with it up until the next few films. And looking at this graphic, a lot of these films haven't even come out yet, or a lot of these TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like Blade up in the air, right?
Right.
Ironheart's still waiting on that. Mind you, that says fall 2023.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
what is even the slate anymore at this point? But that's good. They had to reshuffle. They had to kind of realign with expectation and put out quality versus quantity. And I think that's going to be what Daredevil Born Again. I'm so excited for that.
Yeah.
That's going to be insane. Thunderbolts, I'm really curious to see how they approach that. So I think Phase 5 is in a good place, just to ramp up to the future, to where the future holds.
Yeah, and two, I think, Marvel just recently has had a little bit of bad luck, when it comes to, think like you look at all these release dates, they've gotten pushed back for, there's only been one Marvel release this year, and it was a sequel to two movies that they didn't even make, and it's been a lot of stuff, like obviously, COVID and the world shut down, so that screwed up their releases. Then of course you have the whole thing with Jonathan the Majors, and that screws up all the plans they have in stock. And then of course, and then also just the strikes that went on,
Mm-hmm.
last year and early this year, where it's like, all right, well, that's going to delay things even more, and all of these things kind of compound, where Marvel is having to change their plans on the fly. And people forget that in Phase 1 and a lot of Phase 2, they didn't really have a plan. There was no Infinity Stones introduced, and even the ones that were kind of like retroactively like, oh yeah, the Tesseract, that's an Infinity Stone, like
Exactly.
Thanos kind of gets thrown at the end of Avengers just because it would be a fun tease. They had no plans for that, whereas they had all these plans for Kang, and maybe that ended up kind of biting them in the ass a little bit. Is that they think they kind of overplanned maybe a little bit, and maybe they should have done more like Phase 1, where it's like, all right, we'll tease this thing, we'll tee it up, but now they're obviously having to shift. So this has the sailing outside of their control has not been as smooth as it was early on these last couple of years.
I totally agree. And the shifting from Kang is really just a pivot. It's the biggest pivot, I think, in Hollywood history. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
much has changed over that situation. And we'll get into that. And you kind of have to stop, look, and listen, and just really hear your audience and hear and see the future. And it almost makes me think, are there even going to be slates anymore for future installments? I know we're going to go into a possible slate at the very end of the last topic, but it makes me wonder if projecting that far ahead does more harm than good in regards to expectation, and the expectation we have as fans that, oh yeah, we're definitely going to get Blade next month, and but things happen, right?
Right,
And
right.
I think that, and on the heels of DC kind of getting themselves together and actually starting to make possibly make a quality product that can even rival Marvel, I think is going to do more better for just overall the culture than them just being on top and just kind of giving us anything like, oh, you guys will take Secret Invasion, you guys will take, here you go,
Yeah.
quantity over quality. So very curious to see what Phase 5 looks like in the history books once it's all said and
Mm.
done,
Yeah.
and how it kind of irons out in comparison to the previous phases, especially Phase 4. Phase 4 was so interesting to me.
Yeah, yeah, and it's you bring up DC, and I think it's interesting to look at what they're doing now about like how DC, like Marvel, it's gonna be interesting, like I said, to see what happens with all these films that Marvel's announced. Like, are they actually getting made and stuff? Because Marvel's been really good about like everything they've announced has gotten made. Even uh Inhumans, which was like kind of one of their only movies that didn't get made, still had a life as a not great, but as a TV show, And so DC, on the other hand, will just announce things every other day. It feels like, and then half of them get made, and you never know. It's like, is this one like? I remember when they first announced the Joker movie. It's like, is this actually going to get made that makes $1 billion? And then meanwhile, they're like Nightwing movie, and it's like that's been in developmental hell since who knows when. So you never know with that, and it seems like maybe now DC is going to be more on the like we're actually going to release stuff, and hopefully Marvel keeps up what they've been doing. So we'll see what happens with that. And yeah, once phase like 9 and 10 are happening, are people just going to look back at phase 5 nostalgically like they always do, like they did with the Star Wars prequels, like they did with phase 2?
Yeah, I definitely see like She-Hulk like 5 years from now being some kind of cult classic.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
You guys are all wrong about She-Hulk, you know what I mean?
They really are, man. She-Hulk rules, man. Tatiana Maslany is the best.
Yeah, we haven't seen the last of her. She-Hulk will return.
Yeah.
In Avengers Age of Ultron. So one thing, another topic I wanted to talk about before we go too deep into the future is kind of the Disney Plus experiment, like the Disney Plus platform, and how's that shaped up in retrospect. You know what I mean? Like from the start of it with WandaVision, which was such a high bar, I think, to set for their shows, may it be animated or live action, all the way up until the most recent. What was the last Disney Plus show?
Was it Secret Invasion, or was there something after that?
It was Echo. I think it was Echo.
Yeah.
See, that's what I mean. It's like it's
and What If season 2 right around the same time, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. And Loki season 2. Yeah. So it's like very hit or miss, very touch and go. And I wonder if because they're pulling back, I wonder if we're going to see less Disney Plus content moving forward. Overall, in the way that streaming is going, kind of like streaming as a service is kind of starting to kind of waddle its way to the woodshed a little bit. So I'm curious your feelings on Disney Plus in general, and do you think it was a successful streaming endeavor, or do you think there's still room for it to evolve into something a bit more, I would say, like you said, almost like manageable and not so wild and fancy free,
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think it was really mixed, right? There was some really good stuff that came out of the Disney Plus experiment, I guess we'll call it.
Mm-hmm.
Like we mentioned She-Hulk, but there was some stuff that was also not so great, and it's interesting because that's one thing too that I think maybe has kind of fueled the decline, or at least the perceived decline of Marvel, is that they had to put out so much stuff. This was a studio that was used to releasing a movie or two a year, and now they're releasing 3 movies a year and however many hours, dozens of hours of TV, maybe even hundreds of hours of TV at its peak. And we're starting to realize now that the economics of the streaming thing doesn't really make sense. It doesn't really work out for companies spending all this insane money. And so I think it's going to be a good thing that they pull back, that we're going to get less of it, but maybe of a higher quality. I'm also very, very excited for Daredevil Born Again. I loved Daredevil, but for me it was interesting because I've always been a weird completionist, and even when it wasn't like officially made by Marvel Studios, when there was that weird little schism between Marvel Studios and TV. Obviously now it's still under one umbrella. It's all made by the same people, but there was like the time when you had the Marvel TV division that was run by Jeff Loeb.
Mm-hmm.
He was kind of like the Kevin Feige of the TV, and you had your Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., you had Daredevil and the whole Netflix ones, but then you also had stuff that was, like I mentioned, Inhumans, that was really not good, and stuff that I think was really good but like really underseen, like Cloak and Dagger. I freaking loved Cloak and Dagger, and that stuff kind of it's almost been like that's what was happening before with Marvel, except that now it's all a little more interconnected, whereas before the TV would just react to whatever was in the movies, or sometimes it would just kind of play in its own, hemisphere completely, whereas now it's like, okay, we are bringing in characters from the movies into the shows more than just like, here's a Sif cameo on this episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Now it's like, okay, cool. Here's like a full, like, Falcon and Winter Soldier show, like these characters from the movies, rather than just Coulson getting his own spin-off. So it's they're doing, I think, the same thing but in a different way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And you harken back to a time where they almost tiptoed around the interwoven connection
Mm-hmm.
between the TV entertainment side and the movie side. I remember they used to remember, and I think it was Jessica Jones. There was
Mm-hmm.
the article where it was like big green guy stomps through New York City. They couldn't
Right.
say Hulk, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or
Yeah.
or like or what was the show with Nico Mamori, the not the Outsiders. I can't remember with the teenagers,
Oh, Runaways.
the Runaways. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and it's just like we can't say we're Marvel, but we're Marvel type weird schism, like you
Yeah.
said, and Jeff Loeb trying to make it work, and Marvel has all but eradicated all history of the Jeff Loeb era outside of the things outside of the Netflix series, and even that's
Yeah.
kind of touchy because we're still waiting on um, Heroes for Hire. You know, we're still
Mm.
waiting on Luke
Yeah.
Cage and
Yeah.
Iron Fist to get their proper because we have an understanding that Jessica Jones will be back in some
Mm.
shape, form, or fashion in Marvel, and I think it's going to be smart for them to pull away a little bit and do that quality over quantity, especially when it
Yeah.
comes to Disney Plus, where it's technically, if you have a subscription, it's technically free, and they give it to you all at once. So it's really easily, quickly digestible content that people were already on to the next. There was no fanfare. And it's funny
Yeah.
how we've kind of pulled away from binge watching. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
And
know,
and
yeah, yeah.
well, I was just say, I think it's really interesting that like now, it's like, okay, like we know there's going to be like a Daredevil thing. He's been in She-Hulk, obviously, and but I remember there was like a time when I was like, people were like, yeah, all that stuff is just getting swept under the rug. It's going to be not canon, or it's going to be another alternate universe. It's going to be treated like Elektra, what is it like, or something like that. Like and I remember I was always like, no, like these things were popular. They counted. They had their fans, and I just remember how big of a moment it was for me when it was like in the same week in Hawkeye when you see Kingpin show up and you're like, oh my god, Vincent D'Onofrio's back, and in the same week you get to see Daredevil and Spider-Man Far From, and I lost my mind.
Mine.
I was like, dude, like it was like one of those things that was like we were hoping for, and it was rumored, and Charlie Cox was like, no, he's not in it, and then I remember because I saw it a couple times. The second time I saw it was my mom, and she doesn't know any of this stuff, She's like, oh, cool, Spider-Man. And then she's like, why were you cheering so much when that random blind lawyer showed up? What was that about? I was like, you don't understand, Mama. It's a big deal.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
that was so cool and now that we're bringing them all back into the fold.
I cheered. Because one of my father's favorite heroes is Dee Dee. Is Daredevil. It's always been Dee Dee.
Mm-hmm.
So when like you said, it was almost like affirmation. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
this happened. It was good,
yeah,
and we
yeah.
all understand it was good. And so why is it real? Why not real now?
Mm-hmm.
And when you see him show up and be Spidey's lawyer, it's like
Yeah,
such Marvel, right? It's such old '70s Marvel team up type stuff. It is so undertold, understated, and it's
yeah.
just it's so iconic. You know what I mean? And like you said, I people slept on Hawkeye. I think that's one of the better series of Disney Plus,
Mm-hmm.
honestly. Um, just the way it just an execution, and that's another character. I think Kate Bishop is going to be around for a very long time, and kind of answering that age old question: who is Kingpin a villain of? Is he a Spidey villain?
Mm-hmm.
Is he a
Yeah.
Daredevil villain? Now he's a Hawkeye villain. He's like the street level Doctor Doom to me. He's a
Yeah, 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 yeah.
he
That's a good
makes
way to put
everybody.
it.
It depends on what day it is.
Yeah.
He's a Luke Cage villain. So I think Disney Plus is a positive thing. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think What If was a great animated series. Of course, X-Men '97 is his own podcast. Jeez Louise, but all that said, I think we're gonna get a lot more tailored, I would say, bespoke content
Mm-hmm.
that is a bit more impactful to the overall, health. Not necessarily the storyline of the MCU, but the health of the MCU. There needs to
Yeah.
be those Werewolf by Night, weird
I was
horror
gonna bring up
one-offs.
Werewolf by Night. Yeah.
We need that. We need,
Mm-hmm.
young teenage girl who develops powers in Miss Marvel. We need the universe to be rounded out. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I think
Yeah.
Disney Plus should be that or the Marvel film should be more of the through line. These are the big chunks you need to understand what's going on, because we're in a soap. It's always been like a soap opera type format. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
Disney
totally.
Plus is kind of like what we would call the spinoff books. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Like the tie-ins, so to
yeah,
speak. They're the tie-ins, and they're there to introduce a ghostwriter or
hmm,
a brother voodoo or the
yeah,
off character. You know what I mean? So
yeah, yeah, totally. And I love that you brought up Werewolf by Night, because Disney Plus, like that only exists because of the unique format of a streaming service, right? Like it's weird and experimental and something, it's 50 minutes long, and so it couldn't exist in any other format really. It wouldn't exist. Like you're not going to let this guy who is a composer, Michael Giacchino, like do his weird experimental, mostly black and white like horror movie that doesn't tie into any other Marvel. Like they're not going to like let him make that as a theatrical thing. But as far as like a Disney Plus like one-off special, they're like go for it, And you also brought up What If, and What If is like, yeah, let's now, since it's an animated show, they can do a lot of stuff that uh they would not be able to do with like the like a unless you had an insane budget, and lets you tell all these like little one-off stories and stuff like that sometimes tie together but not always. So I like that the experimentation that comes with having a streaming service like that, where you can do. I really want to see more stuff in the vein of Werewolf by Night, where it's these one-off things that might connect, they might not, whatever. Let somebody who might let a first-time director kind of do their own thing, play in the toolbox, and if it works out, it works out and gets rolled in. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Either way, we can still watch it and enjoy it.
yeah, and I think that's the perfect segue into our next segment, which is going to be speaking towards just the general consensus of Marvel in general, and how, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, so we don't have to dwell too long on this topic. But like we are so back, it's over. We're so back, it's just the up and down of the consistency. You mentioned the consistency of the shows, and I think that it's important. It was important for Marvel to see what they could do, and I've always said that phases 4 and 5, because they had to buy time for the mutants, they had to buy time for the X-Men, and it was like, let's try anything and everything. Let's throw it against the wall and see what sticks. Let's have our horror special. Let's have a psychological thriller in Moon Knight. Let's have our
Yeah.
crime procedural. Let's have our humor, the practice TV show. Let's have our teen drama. So it's like, you know, not catering to everyone is catering to no one, right? So you're gonna have your
Mhm.
detractors when you're making things that are so specific, but they needed to see. It can't just be, crime, espionage, big superhero, boom, boom, there we go, every single
Mhm.
time. So I think this was a good time while you have the time now, because once the mutants are here, it's over. Once the Blackbird, once that hanger drops, and that theme plays, it's already over. Deadpool was the kind of opening
Yeah.
salvo. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on just the general, just overall consensus of just, let's say, fans. Just, are we are do we cry wolf a little too much? Is Chicken Little staring at the moon a little too hard, or do you think any
Oh,
of this sentiment is justified?
I think it's definitely like the fan, the quote unquote the fans or whatever. It's very much like a group think. And I love the graphic you shared where it's like the line that goes between "We are so back" and "It's all over." Like because that's something I do another podcast with my buddy Damien called Midnight Film Society, and that's one thing I'm always giving him crap about, is because he seems to be of that trend where he likes every other Marvel movie, and that's kind of the group think thing. It's like, well, the consensus says that Guardians was good, but then Thor comes out and they're like it's bad, or and then the next thing comes out and it's good, and the next and it's like this whiplash, and it's like, you know what? No, but first of all, things are allowed to be just okay. Like there can't. It doesn't have to be Marvel's back. James Gunn saved the MCU with the this movie. Oh no, a movie with women came out, so now we hate the MCU again. Captain Marvel bombed so hard, or the Marvels bombed so hard. Whatever. It's just like it's exhausting just going back and forth between this. We're so back. Oh no, Marvel screwed up again, and because it does feel like this cycle that never ends, where it's like either Marvel has been saved or Marvel is doomed, and it's like, you know what? Some of these movies are just okay, and sometimes some of the movies that some people hated on, I liked. I liked Thor 4. You know, it wasn't a masterpiece or anything, but I thought it was a fun, good movie. You know, with some shaggy parts, but I liked a lot about it. You know, and you know that's kind of part of the reason why I do underrate it is because it's like just there is this like I feel like internet consensus where no one is allowed to disagree with whatever. If it's like we have decreed that this is a bad movie, and if you have another opinion, then you're just wrong. You're not allowed to say that. Or vice versa. Like if this was something that, most people liked and you were like, it didn't really work for me. It's like, no, you're wrong. Like, how could you possibly dislike this movie? And that that like whole Rotten Tomatoesification where like just whatever the majority rules is like set in stone and canon is something I have a lot of problems with.
Mm-hmm. I definitely, and this is kind of why it took me so long to get back into podcasting, because that was the general consensus, and I didn't feel like I had a voice in that sea of mid. The sea of mid is what I would call it. The sea of mid.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to dislike something, to say I don't like onions. Why don't you like onions? Oh, I don't like the texture. I don't like the taste. I don't like. But just to say I don't like it, just to say you don't like it and can't expound on your feelings. Oh, She-Hulk is mid. Why? It just is. Okay, well, what did you like about it? It's silly. It insists upon itself. Like, okay, what are we talking about here? Like you said, things are. It's okay for things not to be a magnum opus. It can't all be Endgame. It can't all.
Right.
And be honest, I think Infinity War was better, but it can't all be triple A experience. Sometimes it's just an experience, and if you didn't like it, that's okay. But I don't think it's the end of the world, or it's like the varying degrees of depression and euphoria. You know what I mean? And I think it's all about setting proper expectations too. You're not walking into Deadpool and Wolverine expecting the English Patient. You know what I mean? You're going in to have a good time, or you're not. And there's two other movies that are just like it that should dictate if you're going to like this type of movie or not. And
Yeah, absolutely.
I think once we get out of this weird funk of everything is mid, everything is there's nitpicking in everything, and once the rabble have decided on something, that's just the way it is. And if this, I want to do a whole podcast about the Acolyte because I have thoughts about that, but because that should anyway. I feel, ugh.
Yeah, I just started watching it and I'm just like, man, the internet is insane.
Yeah, it's just like, why can't things be different and new? Like, I just want things to be interesting, and why can't any? But this is kind of what I'm here. This is the question, like the general consensus, like, how do we get out of this funk of, like you said, the sea of like a sea of mid. How things could be okay, things could be underrated, things could be overrated. You know what I mean? I know some people who don't like Loki season 2, and I'm like, I love Loki season 2.
Yeah, it rules.
It rules. I'm gonna watch it again. I think even the Marvels was a good good one time watch. It's not on rotation, but I think if you're a Captain Marvel fan, if you even the whole Marvel spectrum it's all the Marvels. Any Marvel you need outside of like Marvel himself, but he's I wonder if they'll ever do Marvel. You think they'll ever do like?
I think they're gonna do it at some point. Yeah.
Like actual Marvel, like with the quantum bands and all that. Well, they already did the quantum bands. So.
Yeah, and they had what's her name? Annette Bening kind of was Annette Bening was Marvel? I can't remember.
I thought Jude Law was Marvel.
Oh, it was Jude Law. You're right.
Or
Annette Bening was like the intelligence or whatever. It's been a minute since I've seen that first one. But yeah.
Captain Marvel lore is the next episode, dude. Yeah. So I wanted to take a second to talk about the next phase 6. What's next? And it's interesting. We're talking about them pulling back. We're talking about restraint. It's literally 3 movies and no Disney Plus future right now. It's Fantastic Four. It's Was King Dynasty. Now it's Doomsday and Secret Wars. And that could be both inspiring and terrifying because it's like, where is the content, right? And this, mind you, this is all 2025, 2026.
Hmm.
And it's like, how much are they banking on FF to be the end all be all, shot in the arm? This is all we need for a while content. You know what I mean? Do you think there's going to be more surprises in this Phase 6? Or are they really bold enough to say, no Disney Plus content, no additional films. Just these three are going to float us for this full year. I think that's bold if they pull that off. But also, I don't know. I think if it kind of feels like money's left on the table. Can't have your cake and eat it too. I felt a certain way about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that we're gonna get some other stuff. I think it's one of the things where, like we said, they announced all this stuff, and most of it's come to fruition, but there's still a few things up in the air. And I feel like maybe they're like, we don't want to get too ahead of ourselves and start announcing all these things. Let's see how these things go. Let's maybe develop a Shang-Chi movie a little or two sequel before it happens. Let's work on these things before we start announcing everything to the world 2 years before we've even cast anyone. Because I think they're like, we announced Kang Dynasty and then we had a backpedal, and maybe they're like, what, let's just hold off on announcing things so we don't have to do all this backpedaling. Because I do think we're gonna get some of the Disney Plus stuff, some of the especially some theatrical things that's gonna be between these Avengers movies and Fantastic Four. So I think we'll get it. I think it's going to be, they're going to play it a little bit closer to the vest than just being like, here's the plan for the next 6 years or whatever. Obviously, they announced because they announced their recent change of plan. We're still just found out that Doctor Doom is going to be the big bad of this saga, rather than Kang. So I think they're gonna let us sit in that for a little bit before they start making any more announcements.
Absolutely, and I'm hearing whispers of some kind of Wakanda-based Disney Plus show, like Eyes of
Yeah,
Wakanda or Claws of Wakanda or something like that. So I think,
yeah, I've heard of Eyes of Wakanda. Like it's been, yeah, like you said, whispers about it for a while now.
yeah. So I'm really curious to see how, if there's even more excitement to keep it closer to the vest. You know what I mean? Just announce
Yeah,
these things like 3 months before they come out, like an album or a video game release or something like that. Like, every Comic Con, that's when they announce stuff, and only then
right, right.
for the
Yeah,
next
yeah,
year,
yeah,
like they
yeah,
used to back in the day. You know what I mean? And it
yeah.
and it keeps expectations in line. And it's funny. My favorite group of all time is the Fantastic Four. That
Mm,
over the X-Men, over the Avengers, over the Justice League. I've been a huge FF kid ever since I was smaller, had a thing, and all that good stuff. So when I see that and I see how the production's going and the direction they're taking, it's extremely fascinating just to kind of see where their brains are and
mhm.
the flavor of Marvel they're planning to give us with this film, and kind of how does this set up Doomsday, and we're going
Yeah,
to talk about Doomsday in a moment. But I think these gaps are going to fill with little things, maybe
mhm.
maybe a few more television specials. They always seem to do a holiday special. Maybe there's something in the pocket where they're going to just kind of spring that on us. Guardians is gone, so what can they do as a Christmas special? Maybe some X-Men 97 based,
Yeah,
hop more a Morlock Christmas. I don't know.
yeah,
But yeah, it's curious. It's interesting, and I agree with you that there's got to be more than just the
yeah.
three on this list. And um, do you think that fans are going to be okay? Are we going to be able to cope knowing that we don't know everything beforehand, and our plates aren't made before we eat, so to speak?
Well, I think the YouTube corner of the MCU fans that's all about big red arrows pointing at things in the thumbnails is going to suffer a little bit. But I really I've never been a fan of all that. I'm more like let's watch these movies from a critical angle and analyze them rather than being like, did you see this thing in the background? That means that this guy's going to show up 3 movies from now. Those Easter eggs are cool and I love them, but it's not like the driving force for me to go see a movie. They're the dessert, rather than the meal.
I love that you mentioned that because it irritates me that anyone with a blue check can just go on Twitter and lie now.
Yeah,
yeah, the symbiote suit's going to show up in the next Spider-Man film. Like, where are you getting this information from? You know?
Right, right.
It's just,
Yeah, comicbookmovie.com or whatever. What was that there's that one website that's like right like 2% of the
yeah,
time
they're
or whatever
right.
because they just
They just
throw
say
at everything.
anything, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, Digitally enhanced Samuel Jackson is going to play Blade. Like, what? No, this is not happening. And it's like, like you said, Easter eggs are the seasoning; they're not the steak. If that makes
Yeah.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
Totally.
And it's fun to see because as a comic book nerd, you're kind of like, oh yeah, that and that this that and the third. But a film should not be just that, because then it just becomes Ready Player One.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a really good poll. That's a movie that I have a lot of problems with, despite my love for Steven Spielberg. Because that movie is just kind of reference a palooza. And as we'll talk about in a second here at Comic Con, I was actually lucky enough to be at Comic Con,
Oh,
and
that's
one of
cool.
the yeah, it was a blast. But one of the panels that I saw the night before the Marvel one was the Alien Romulus panel, which obviously just came out, and Fede Alvarez, the director, was talking about how there is a lot of for lack of a better term, alien DNA in that movie, references to Alien and Aliens and even Prometheus and stuff. But he's like, that can't be, the memberries, as he put it, like use the South Park term. That can't be the meal. It's got to be something more substantial than that. That stuff is good and it's great, and it's really important to have reverence for these things stories that came before you. But if it's just references, then like I said, it's Ready Player One.
Yeah, it becomes Funko Pop the movie, and
Yes. Yeah.
and it's like I was watching Axel Foley F the
Mm.
other day, and I was
Yeah.
like, it's beat for beat just the movie. It's like
Yeah.
there's no,
Yeah.
but it's such a slippery slope, right? Because then you
Mm.
have Steel, which has nothing to do with
Mm.
with the comic book.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It's all direct writers fancy and what they envision Steel to be.
Mm.
So it's like you have to it's almost like the squint test, right? It's like
Mm.
if it's like you have to be able to recognize the character, recognize their morals, recognize their strengths, their weaknesses, but tell your own story.
Yeah.
You
Or
know.
a movie that I think of that did it really well is the Lego movie, right? Which
Hmm.
is a movie that is built all on these different IPs and stuff like that interacting. So it's so much of that movie is like, here's references to Star Wars, here's references to like Batman's a main character in the movie. Here's all these different references, but it's still a movie that manages to tell its own unique, interesting story that could only really be told with Lego. Like, it's so important that it is Legos that it's happening, which is why I think it worked a lot better than like say the Lego Ninjago movie, which is fine, but it's like it's okay. This is just like a reference to a specific brand of Lego, whereas like the Lego movie, like that first one, is so special and interesting, and it uses all of these themes and tropes and stuff like that from all these different characters and franchises that it's interacting with, but it's not just being like, hey, look, here's Superman. Hey, look, here's like the Iron Giant. It's like saying it's like using all these people in a way that's very strategic and smart, and also lets it be its own thing.
100%. And going back to my Deadpool review, it just these characters are airdropped into. They kind of are, but they're not. Right?
Mm. Yeah,
These
yeah,
these member berries are airdropped into the situation, but they're there for a reason, and they're there, and they have their own kind of engine to why they're doing this, and the member berries of that film are there for a purpose, to make a point and to tell
hmm
a story that could not be told outside of the machinations of Deadpool. So it's like
yeah,
movies that really understand and learn how to dance around that goes to show the skill of the director, the skill of the screenwriter. You know what I mean? And how they
yeah,
can
absolutely.
play with these toys that have been around for years and have their own expectations and how to dance around those expectations.
Yeah,
So
totally.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So let's talk about Downey is Doom. Downey, Downey is Doom.
yeah,
I didn't know how to feel about this when I first heard it. I was kind of verklempt a little bit. I was
yeah,
just
yeah,
like, all right, this is what we're doing, and I was upset. I'm not gonna lie, I can't front. I was just like, why? I get it. It's the most gettable thing ever, right? It's
yeah,
like the panic. It's literally a panic button. Give this man whatever he wants. Let's make and put him back in the forefront as possibly one of the most important Marvel villains of all time.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm also pretty mixed on it because it does feel like, we talked about how Marvel was doing all these new interesting different things in phase 4 and 5, and they were trying things, and it feels like a little bit of them being like, you know what, this stuff didn't work out. Let's play it safe. Let's go to what we knew worked for us in the past. Not just Robert Downey Jr., but at that same panel at Comic-Con, they also announced something that people have been expecting, but still, the Russo brothers were coming back. And it's like, okay, we're going back to the directors that worked with us before that made these movies so successful. We're going back to the actor that made this so successful. It does feel like very much this we're going to play it safe rather than take a lot of interesting risks, which can work. I had heard rumors that RDJ would be coming back to the MCU, and I just assumed it was Iron Man. So I am actually really interested to see that, okay, he is coming back, but not in the capacity that I thought, which interests me. I'm like, okay, this is an interesting take that I did not think they were going to do. Because if Iron Man had just come back, I would be like, oh man, that kind of undoes like how great that ending of Endgame was, that great sacrifice. But it's like, okay, he's coming back in a very different capacity. Like, how is this going to work? And I will say, because I'd done Comic-Con once or twice before, I'd never done the Hall H thing. And so I actually did the Hall H thing that day. And being in the room when they announced all this stuff, when Robert Downey Jr. got unmasked, it was electric. And that was exciting, And it'd be so cool, like, obviously, because of the way movies are made and everyone knows everything, if RDJ was surprised in the movie, like, as Doctor Doom the villain, that would be the coolest thing ever. I feel like I got the next best thing seeing them like announce it on the stage. That was a really cool moment, and I feel like it is coloring my perspective a little bit. But I'll just say the best way I can describe it is cautiously optimistic. I'm like, they could pull this off. It's a little bit safer than I would like, but you know what? Maybe it's going to be another banger.
It's interesting because as you were talking and going through your experience in Hall H and just being there for that pop, for that, oh my goodness, what? Like just the shocked into excitement, right?
Yeah.
It makes me think of Carl Urban and Judge Dredd, where if it's Robert Downey, if they put him in the suit, they put him in the armor, they put him in all the costume, we don't see his face. He has the muffled Doom voice and he's acting through all that. That would be super interesting until the very end, until he does the face reveal and it's actually him. But if you let this man act, and we all know he can act, as Oscar-winning actor.
Yeah.
If they gave him that to chew on and said, this is going to be the role of your life, we need you to act without no one seeing your face, are you okay with that? Because Doom doesn't go around showing his face, and he's famously known to hate his face. That's why he, Man in the Metal Mask. So I think if they gave him that to chew on, and then he had the opportunity to really act and really just show us another side to his acting, I think, like you said, that's curious. That tickles the curiosity in me. And like, where is this Doom from? I know this is the multiverse saga. So is this Doom floating around with the Fantastic Four in their universe?
I think yeah, he's gonna get introduced because in Fantastic Four, which is kind of like an alternate '60s universe, That's what my theory is. Not that I like to theorize, but it makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, he's got to be, and then just kind of hitching a ride with them on whatever adventures they go on. So very curious, very cautiously optimistic because I love Fantastic Four so much.
Yeah.
I just want Doom done right. Is he going to do an accent? Is he going to, is there going to be Latveria? It's all got to be there, right? And how is he going to play with others? And given that he's Doom, and given that, and this is a good segue to one of our second to last topic, like Secret Wars, like that is a word. Those are two words together that mean so much to comic book fans. Decades apart, maybe the original run or the Hickman run, both really have everything to do with Doctor Doom.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very curious to see what that ends up being, and because I think, I talked about, how the Ultimates in the early 2000s was really nice because it was kind of that reset and that way for new fans to get to read comics and stuff like that. But even that started to become, pretty convoluted and stuff, and then they ended up part of the reason they did Secret Wars is because it got so convoluted and it was kind of a little bit of a reset. And Marvel is a little bit more strategic, and they did one of these, like you said, in like I think the 80s and then in like 2015. Whereas DC, like every 2 years, they'll be like, here's another
There's
hard
another
reset.
crisis. There's another
Right,
crisis.
exactly.
Yeah.
There's another crisis. There's another new 52, whatever it is. Whereas this feels like the MCU, was a really good way for people who hadn't, like, were not as familiar with these characters to kind of get a fresh start in the way that the comics were in the 60s, in the way that the Ultimates were in the aughts, in the way that the TV shows were in the 90s. And now the MCU is experiencing the same problem that all these properties have had before, where it's starting to get so convoluted and there's so many different shows that I think that Secret Wars is going to do the same thing in the films that this did in the comic, where it's going to simplify it in some way, and it's going to strain things down. Where I don't know what that means, but I think that we might not even get phases after this. It's going to be something completely different, and it's going to be a way for them to, kind of like, they for a while in the comics they were like, okay, well that ended, like the Secret Wars ended the Ultimate Universe. I think they've kind of since then been like, actually, it's still around. Don't worry, Miles is just in a different universe now. I think they're going to probably do something where they're going to streamline it, because that's been the whole. That's right, and you have the Infinity Saga, and it's like this huge thing, and it builds up to Thanos, and it's like, okay, we're now, how do you go even bigger? You start bringing in all these different properties from all these different movies. You have all the 3 Spider-Men show up in this movie. You have all these, forgotten Fox and characters show up in the Deadpool movie, and I think that's going to build and build and build until we get to Secret Wars, and then after that, it's going to be so over the top that you're going to have to go small. Like, I think this is going to be a big crescendo for the MCU and like all of the Marvel stuff that we've known to this point.
Absolutely. And this has been rattling around in my head for months, is the idea that this is the ultimate love letter to everything that's come before.
Yeah.
It's going to be every hero that you've ever seen. It's going to be every villain that you've ever seen. It's going to be all thrown at the screen in the most classic, grandiose spectacle of all time. Mm-hmm. And then one thing about Marvel is that Marvel has never had the opportunity to play with all their toys.
Yeah.
There's, X-Men weren't there, mm-hmm. right? Spider-Man wasn't there for a good chunk of it. You know what I mean? Even the Hulk was sparse, right? Mm-hmm. So we're finally at a place where they can play with like 99% of their true roster, and they're like, let's just start it over, right? Where you can have Spider-Man be the same age as the X-Men, be, mm-hmm. The Fantastic Four take place in the time they're supposed to take place. Let's just reset all of it and have our full array of heroes to exist all at the same time, like they're supposed to, quote unquote. And I think the multiverse is going to bring all those different flavors and make a beautiful soup out of everything, and mm-hmm. then that's
a nice gumbo.
It's gonna make a beautiful gumbo, and then that gumbo's gonna be eaten, and that person's gonna like fall into a black hole, and whatever comes back out at the other end is Marvel Comics. It's the MCU.
Right? Yeah.
So and it's also gonna be a love letter to Doom. This is like this is the Doom show, and he's gonna be able to chew up every bit of scenery as the infinite God being that I think he's going to be, and you're going to see so much stuff that's going to set up the next whatever they're doing. Like you said, we may not even have phases after this. It can be totally turned upside down on where their focus is. The Avengers may just be gone, or just completely reset. A new actor as Tony Stark, new actor as Steve Rogers, brand new Black Widow. You just don't know. Because they could do that because these actors have all aged out. People, and even the ones that are willing to do it, it's like, you kind of have to be content. You have to be amongst your contemporaries in that situation. So it'll be interesting to see what births from Secret Wars, and I have this super crazy theory that I love to play around in my head, that Secret Wars is technically going to be not just a love letter to Marvel, but a love letter to DC as well. and that the Secret War is going to be the DCEU versus the MCU.
Just like those old, what is it, amalgam
It's
comics
gonna
from
be
like the
it's
80s or whatever.
literally going to be amalgam, and from that Superman's going to come, and it's going to Superman's the reset, and Marvel's going to have their reset, and it's just going to be like, you know what I mean? But that don't listen to me. That don't listen. Don't listen to that. That's just nonsense.
Yeah,
And
I hope that it really gives it the MCU as we've known it a real kind of send off. Like, because that's one thing people are saying was like, well, the MCU like it should have ended with Endgame, and maybe it should have, but like the thing is like things that are successful are not allowed to end, and this is the most successful thing ever. That's why, despite its flaws, I love The Dark Knight Rises because it was the only time we've ever gotten an end to a Batman saga. Usually, it'll just be like these movies go until they're bad and not popular anymore, and they end up getting canceled. Like, and like the DCU fizzles out where the last thing is just like Aquaman 2, and it's like, what was that? Whereas if they could really put a pin in this, and I'm sure they'll still make Marvel movies, but if they were like to be like, this is the end of what we know as Marvel, in some way, if Secret Wars could somehow do that, then I think that would be pretty spectacular.
yeah, a bookend, a new start, a new
Yeah,
beginning,
yeah,
just bookended. Like the Infinity Saga was the bookend for that. Have a
yeah.
bookend for all of it, and
Hmm.
so that the next generation could be like, that's not Spider-Man. Well, this was our Spider-Man. Tom Holland was our
Yeah.
Spider-Man, and Robert Downey Jr. was our Iron Man. And here's the old tomes of the MCU saga. This the golden age, so to speak.
Yeah, 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 absolutely.
You know, and the last topic of the night is probably one of my favorite, the funnest. And I mentioned it earlier. Here come the mutants. The mutant saga is what they said
Mhm.
is coming next for Marvel. And my question to you is: do you think we're going to get the mutant saga before or after Secret Wars?
I think before, because like I said, I think that like after Secret Wars, it's like going to be something entirely different. But they've clearly been seeding in all the mutant stuff. Like in this picture, you've got obviously Camilla Khan and Patrick Stewart and Namor, which is like another. It's crazy that they got the rights to Namor back, and he was a really interesting kid. He was probably my favorite part of Black Panther 2.
Yes, yes,
But I think that's when we are talking about before, like they've only got these couple things announced. I think that a lot of the missing chunks that they haven't announced yet are gonna be X-Men things. I think that's what they're holding off for because you don't want to play all your cards at once, right? You want to keep those X-Men cards close to the chest and be like, you know what? All right, I'm not saying this one will happen necessarily, but they're like, here's your Gambit Channing Tatum movie or whatever it might be. I think those are going to be the Mutant Saga is going to be all those missing parts that we haven't seen that's going to fall between those two Avengers movies.
absolutely. Putting the band together, because if you
Mm-hmm.
think we've had Professor Xavier at on some level, we've had Beast, we've
Yeah, yeah,
we've had, of course, Wolverine, Gambit. So I think they're going to start peppering in, like you said, the mutants, and maybe not in their own TV shows, but in other places. Maybe we'll see a mutant in Daredevil. There's a lot of street level mutants that we can run into.
mm-hmm.
You know, um, even in Fantastic Four, there could be mutants that are floating around in that universe that happen to
Yeah,
tie
yeah,
into whatever the FF are doing. So I think it would be smart for them to start laying that groundwork now, like you said, not wait
mm-hmm.
another 10 years or
Yeah,
another five
yeah,
years when Secret Wars is all said and done, and Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel being, they're switching her from being an Inhuman to a mutant because of
mm-hmm. Yeah,
the whole thing where she was supposed to be a mutant in the first place, but the Marvel ups made her Inhuman because of the beef they were having with Fox, and a very interesting story of
mm-hmm.
that character. But
Yeah,
I think that, like I said, once those mutant doors open, the Pandora's box, it's kind of over. They're going to be inundated because they're so popular. You know what I mean?
yeah,
If you
yeah,
if you're in the '90s and the X-Men were everything, and Marvel's just been waiting to get them back, and now that they have them, and Kevin Feige can say the word X-Men and not blush. You know what I mean? It's
exactly. Yeah,
huge. It's super huge. And I was reading this article about how he's like there was so much paperwork in legalese they had to swim
mm-hmm.
through before he could even allude to mutants. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And he's like, yeah, Deadpool is really the flood door, and here we come. here we go. You know what I mean? You know,
Yeah.
it's going to be insane. It's going to be insane.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the way they have really peppered this through, like even like they when they talked about Kamala Khan, they're like, and they say something like, "Oh, there was something mutated in your DNA," and you hear the little, and you're like, "Oh," and okay, so this is something that I saw at Comic Con, so I don't know if this is widely known or not, but can I? It's something that maybe is a potential tiny spoiler for Civil or not Civil War. What's the new Captain America? Brave New World.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. Spoil away.
Yeah.
It's totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because this was something that was not in the regular trailer, but in the Comic Con trailer, it's revealed that. Which, by the way, I'm like, I love that because everyone was like, "What happened to that what's it called? The Celestial."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that like ended up in the ocean or whatever. And it's just kind of this weird thing that like never got referenced. And it's like, oh, actually, that's made of adamantium, and that's how they're getting adamantium brought into the MCU proper, which is like hilarious and awesome to me. And when I saw that, I was like, I am so on board for this. Like that's the best possible way you could have like brought in this random weird thing from the movie that, one of the like least popular MCU movies. But it just shows that, I don't know, everything is still canon in MCU. Everything's connected, and Tim Blake Nelson coming back in that movie
That's
after
cool.
not,
That's the thing I'm excited
that's
about.
So
that's
cool.
so
like
sick.
he's just his head's been laying on the ground bleeding for like since 2010. There's like nothing gets forgotten. Like I lost my mind in Doctor Strange when Anson Mount showed up, and I was like, oh my gosh, from Inhumans, the show that I only watched, like I can't believe that show was awful, but Anson Mount was great. Like everything that you think is just like a weird dumb thing, it all comes back, and so clearly all these things they've been seeding are gonna matter.
Absolutely. The adamantium arms race is going to be insane, and I think
Yeah.
they can do that so right with so many characters that use adamantium historically. They can even touch on it in Daredevil Born Again, because Bullseye has an adamantium spine. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
So I think that's going to happen before Captain America. So very curious on how they kind of play with adamantium, and it's like adamantium is synonymous with Wolverine, right? So it's like, where is Logan floating? Where has Logan been this whole time?
Right. Yeah.
Is it Hugh Jackman? Is it a different actor? Which I would be okay with if it's just a completely different dude. Maybe the new Wolverine going forward. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the Mutant Saga and the breadcrumbs they've laid, and what you get, like you said, nothing is for chance. It's all part of the kaleidoscope of Marvel. And I think that's a perfect place for us to end. Is that whatever the future holds, I think that we should all understand that it all holds a place in their grand scheme, and these people get paid a lot of money to iron out these little what you think may be inconsistencies. And like, they forgot about, they never forgot, because we never let them stop hearing it. It's just time will tell, and these things take time. So I think as a culture, as a pop culture, we all just need to relax, and a watch pot doesn't boil. Let things be at que sera, sera, whatever it will be. And if you don't like it, that's great. If you do like it, I love it. But as a culture, we all just need to agree upon that this is amazing stuff, because one day this can all just be gone and not popular or lucrative anymore. We're back to the 90s. We're back to the 80s where we were thirsting for a Spider-Man film. We were thirsting for a Captain America movie because we just didn't think it was possible,
Yeah, right. And it's like, now it's like we've got a great, awesome, like anything from like Colleen Wing shows up, like it's like it's all there. We've never had it. So, like comic book fans are eating.
100%. 100%. And it's just never been better. Like, I don't see the complaint, man. I remember when I was a kid and I remember one of my favorite memories is I was at Frankensons in Los Angeles, California. And there was a Spider-Man cosplayer back in the day that were just like a performer. And then nobody was hanging around Spider-Man. Everyone was around the X-Men. And I told my dad, I was like, Dad, why is no one hanging out with Spider-Man? He was like, watch, Spider-Man will be the biggest star in the world. Just give him time. Like no one knows who.
Yeah.
That's back. This is like in the '90s where the animated series hadn't come out yet.
Mm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So it's like coming from there to now, where you see the Sinister Six fighting 3 Spider-Man at the Statue of Liberty. It's like it's mind blowing. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely, man.
Derek, this has been an amazing podcast. This has been so cool.
Thank you. I've had a blast chatting it up with you.
This is like I love talking shop. I love talking, especially Marvel, and having this discussion with you has been it's really been, not to jump ship, not but it's been like a mother box of just contained energy. It's the ultimate nullifier of of content. So I would like to ask, where can we find you? Where can we find you?
Yeah, check out, however you're listening to this, check out Underrated Movie Podcast. It's on all the podcast apps. It's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get the podcast. Or just go to underratedmoviepodcast.com. That has the links to all of the places you can listen to it. It's got all the social medias. If you look up Underrated Movie Podcast, pretty much on any social media, it'll come up. There, you can also check out, like I mentioned, if you are a big Marvel fan and want to hear me talk about some more Marvel stuff, check out Infinity Stones and Dragon Bones on all the podcast apps. And then I also should mention I do my other podcast, it's called Midnight Film Society. Now we changed the name about a year ago. Midnight Film Society, where I just talk about recently released movies. So those are all the places. Underrated Movie Podcast.
Absolutely, check them out, please. I'm going to be diving deep into the the toy box of underrated films, because there are going to be some gems in there that I just yell at people about. They don't hear me out. You know what I mean? Like, please watch The Shadow. What's that? I'm like, oh Jesus,
dude! I just stand on my soapbox every other week and just yell, "Watch this one!
Watch it!" And you're just like, okay. Oh man, so. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this episode of Masters of the Nerdiverse. I'm, of course, your host, Mike G. You can always find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spreaker, SoundCloud, YouTube, all of it. I said YouTube twice because it's that important. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, we will always have such sights to show you. Thank you, Derick, for being on. And everyone take care and have a great rest of your Marvel year. Yes, indeed.